Hi, readers. So, we've been talking about narrative nonfiction and biographies. And we've been talking about how when you read a biography, you can read it as a story and think about the subject's traits, their motivations and needs, the struggles and threats that the main character or subject faces. And we can also read it as information, thinking about what topics we're learning about and the main idea and supporting details and what information is important versus what's not important. Today, we're going to be talking more about narrative nonfiction and reading them as stories more specifically. So, we're going to start off just by reading an excerpt, which is just a part of a book from a book called Cactus Hotel. On a hot, dry day in the desert, a bright red fruit falls from a tall saguaro cactus. Plop! It splits apart on the sandy floor. 2,000 black seeds glisten in the sunlight. When the air cools in the evening, an old pack rat comes out and eats the juicy fruit. Then he skitters across the sand. A seed left clinging to his whiskers falls off under a palo verde tree. It is a good place for the seed to drop. A spotted ground squirrel looking for something to eat does not see it. A house finch chirping high in the palo verde does not see it. After many days, a heavy rain falls on the desert. Soon, a young cactus sprouts up from the ground. Slowly, slowly, the seedling grows. The palo verde protects it from the hot summer sun and cold winter nights. After 10 years, the cactus is only 4 inches high. It is just big enough for desert ants to climb its spiny sides. So you're probably thinking, readers, that, hey, that's not a biography. And you're right, it's not a biography, but it is a narrative nonfiction text because it is teaching us about a nonfiction topic, cactuses and how they grow, but telling it in a story-like way. We could picture in our minds everything happening. They're using a lot of descriptive words and details. Now, we can think about these narrative nonfiction texts the same way we think about biographies, about the struggles, the wants, and needs about these topics. So today I want to teach you that readers use strategies they've developed for reading biographies on any text that is narrative nonfiction. You could be reading about the life of a lobster or how Cleopatra took over Egypt. Just the same way you read stories, thinking about the main character's traits, wants, and struggles. So let's read this piece again with that lens in mind, asking ourselves, who is the main character? What do they want? What are the struggles they are facing? And maybe how do they overcome them? On a dry, hot day in the desert, a bright red fruit falls from a tall saguaro cactus. Plop! It splits apart on the sandy floor. 2,000 black seeds glisten in the sunlight. When the air cools in the evening, an old pack rat comes out and eats the juicy fruit. Then he skitters across the sand. A seed left clinging to his whiskers falls off under a palo verde tree. It is a good place for the seed to drop. A spotted ground squirrel looking for something to eat does not see it. A house finch chirping high in the palo verde does not see it. After many dry days, a heavy rain falls on the desert. Soon, a young cactus sprouts from the ground. Slowly, slowly, the seedling grows. The palo verde protects it from the hot summer sun and cold winter nights. After 10 years, the cactus is only 4 inches high. It is just big enough for desert ants to climb its spiny sides. Okay, readers, so right now I want you to think about who is our main subject here. What is the main subject? Give you a second. Are you thinking it is the saguaro cactus seed? Then you are correct. What are some of its struggles or wants? Well, of course it wants to grow and survive, but it has a lot of struggles. First of all, when it's dropped by the right place by the little rat, it could have gotten eaten by a squirrel. It could have gotten eaten by a bird. It also is perfectly protected under that palo verde tree. And if it's not, it could have been exposed to a lot of weather conditions and broken or flooded, and something could have gone wrong. So even though we are talking about a cactus here, we're still able to read it the way we read a biography, thinking about things like the main character, the main subjects, and struggles and needs. So now we're going to think about that in a different way and use a strategy I like to call somebody wanted but so. So, the somebody, you think, who is the main character? Wanted, what does he or she want? But what gets in the way? And so, how does the main character respond? What do they do? And you can do this work with your biographies or any narrative nonfiction text. So I'm going to read a little bit more of who is Malala Yousafzai, and then we're going to try this work. We're going to try a somebody wanted but so with her. So remember, it's been a little while since we read this, but last time we read, remember the Taliban, that really dangerous terrorist group, started to take over where Malala lives. And they did not want girls to go to school. They actually started burning girls' schools. And only boys could go to school. Even though it was really still dangerous, though, Malala kept on going. So let's continue from there. Chapter 5, A Secret Diary. In December, Malala's worst fear came true. An order came from the Taliban. Girls' schools in Mingora would not reopen after the winter break. The Taliban said boys could go back to school, but girls would not be returning. Malala and her friends were devastated. Could this be true? What would life be like if they couldn't go to school? One day, a BBC reporter in Pakistan asked Ziauddin for help. Remember, that's Malala's dad. The BBC Urdu website was looking for a teacher to write about the schools closing in Mingora. Ziauddin talked to some teachers, but they refused. They were afraid of the Taliban. Writing about what was happening in their city was much too dangerous. Malala had spoken up before, and she had enjoyed it. In September 2008, she had given a speech at a local club for reporters. The title of her speech was, "How Dare the Taliban Take Away My Basic Right of Education?" Newspapers all over Pakistan printed her words. She was glad to tell people how strongly she felt. She had said what she believed, and nothing bad had happened. Ziauddin thought his daughter might be the perfect person to write the blog for the BBC. He asked Malala. She was only 11. She didn't know much about writing journals, but she was ready to try it. Malala's parents talked it over with the man from the BBC. Everyone knew that Malala would do a good job, but there was much to consider. Malala was worried that something bad might happen to her father if she wrote the blog. The man from the BBC was worried about Ziauddin too. He was also worried about Malala. Ziauddin wasn't worried about Malala. No one would hurt a child, he thought. That seemed impossible, out of the question. The man at the BBC talked to Malala and her parents many times. Finally, it was decided. Malala would write the blog under one condition. She would use a fake name. Malala's blog would be called Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl. She would use the name Gul Makai. This was the name of a strong girl in a famous Pashtun folktale. Malala would write notes and read them to the reporter every day on the phone. She would tell him how she and her friends were feeling and what was going on at home and in school. The reporter would put her words onto the website. The BBC website started to publish Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl on January 3, 2009 in Urdu and in English. Other blog posts followed. Malala's words were about getting ready for school and studying for her test. All the girls worried that the school might not reopen after winter break. There was bombing in the night, and the girls were afraid. They were afraid that their school might be destroyed, like so many other schools in Mingora. However, the Pakistan army was fighting the Taliban. Maybe they would win, and school wouldn't close after all. At the same time, the New York Times newspaper was making a film about the Taliban who were taking over the Swat district and closing girls' schools in Mingora. The film featured Malala and her father. The cameras roamed Mingora for 6 months, filming the fighting between the Pakistan army and the Taliban fighters. Gunfire was heard everywhere. People were desperate to get out of the city. Terrified men, women, and children climbed onto the roofs of overcrowded buses and trucks that were leaving. Malala and Ziauddin talked about the bombs that exploded outside their home night after night, making it impossible to sleep. Malala said her father could no longer walk her to school. It was too dangerous for him to be seen outside. She liked her blue school uniform, she said, but now she couldn't wear it. The few students who still attended dressed in plain clothes so the Taliban wouldn't know where they were going. Her school would soon close, she said, covering her face, trying not to cry. She wanted to be a doctor. Doctors must study for many years. How could she ever realize her dream if there was no school to go to? In January 2009, the Taliban did the very thing that Malala had been dreading. All girls' schools would close for good on January 15th. Boys' schools would stay open, but girls would have to remain at home. On January 14th, when school was over, Malala said goodbye to Muniba and all of her friends. No one knew what would happen next. Malala spent the days reading, getting into fights with her brothers, and talking to the BBC reporter. By February, Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl was being read all over Pakistan and in many other parts of the world. Malala continued writing it through March 12th. The name Gul Makai was becoming well known in Swat. People wondered who it was. Malala didn't tell anyone. Because Ziauddin had started schools for girls, many people wanted to interview him about what was happening in the Swat Valley. They wanted to talk to his daughter, too. Malala appeared on a Pakistani talk show. The host asked her questions about the war and schools closing in Mingora. Most people in Pakistan believed in education for girls. They were upset at what was happening in the Swat Valley. Many had read Malala's diary. The Taliban leaders had to listen. In February, it seemed as if the Taliban was having a change of heart. They announced that the girls could go back to school. Malala and her friends couldn't wait to return to their studies. But even though some girls' schools were open again, the fighting in Mingora got worse. It was dangerous to walk in the city. Many students stayed home. Others left the city with their families. By May, Ziauddin saw there was no choice. He closed his schools again. Malala and her family packed what they could and hurried out of Mingora. So it was so dangerous they had to leave. They spent the next few months living in the houses of relatives in safer cities nearby. Malala missed her books, her friends, and especially her school. But she was glad to be away from Mingora and the sound of exploding bombs. On July 24th, the Yousafzai family finally returned home. Mingora was a bombed-out shell of what it had once been. The war was over, and the Taliban had moved into the hills. That was good, but the Taliban fighters knew who Malala was. She had spoken in public. She had been on TV. Many people had read her BBC diary or watched the New York Times film. People were talking about her. In August, Malala's school finally reopened. Malala was too busy studying to worry about the Taliban. She had a new dream now. She wanted to become a politician. Politicians work to pass laws that they believe will benefit their country. Malala wanted to make sure that all children everywhere had the opportunity for an education. And that's where we will stop. So let's try and recap what we read so far in our biography using Somebody Wanted But So. So our somebody is Malala Yousafzai, a girl from Pakistan. She wanted equal education for girls everywhere, and really for people everywhere, but especially for girls. But what got in the way is the Taliban, a terrorist group, because they will not allow this. They burn girls' schools and cause violence to those who break the laws. So what she did was she spoke out and started talking to news journalists so people everywhere could learn about what was going on in her city and in her country. So readers, in narrative nonfiction, we can use Somebody Wanted But So to help us summarize who the character is, their wants or needs or their motivations, what gets in the way, and what they do to solve that problem. So what you're going to do today with your biographies you're reading, you're going to fill out the template just like how I did, but on whoever you are reading about. I'm really excited to see who you guys are reading about and everything about them. All right, off you go.